Snintantla, good morning to you, and thank you so much for your time this morning. Surely you should be pleased with this ruling. Was it expected?
Definitely expected, and I think it's one of those things where we're hoping that common sense finally prevails. I mean, it's 2 years down the line. We shouldn't have got to this point where we were fighting these issues in court. I think the court itself stated that there was no scientific or legal justification for government's ban on the sale of cigarettes during the initial stages of the lockdown period. So we're happy with what's happened. But again, we are of the view that government should have engaged industry without the need to resort to the courts for dealing with this issue.
Yeah. I mean, the court deciding that the ban was both unconstitutional and invalid. Let's reflect a bit on the consequences of that decision by government and what we've seen in the economy, the ramifications of that, of course, that we continue, are supposed to see even 2 years later.
Definitely. I think the biggest challenge now is, of course, combating the illicit trade, which has grown in size and stature, and as far as the issue of the sale of cigarettes coming from our neighboring countries unlawfully. This is something that we did warn government on when the ban was initially implemented, and now we're seeing the effects of that. Unfortunately, the legitimate industry is now having to contain that. So, I mean, as much as the ban is over, we're still not yet back to the state of the industry as it was pre the COVID-19 pandemic. And it's unfortunate that we didn't have any assistance from government in as far as tackling this particular concern.
Government too was affected by this, decision. I'm sure you can agree with me. And as far as tax revenue is concerned, 2020 reporting that they lost around 36 million rand just in tax revenue per day. But also when we look at, businesses, we know that jobs have been lost due to this, prohibition. Also, it stalled local investment to the country, right? So what work lies ahead in rebuilding all the revenue lost? The job losses, as well as the local investment that you still need to attract to South Africa?
Okay, I think we have to take a few steps back and look at what was recommended when the Nugent Commission looked at the affairs of the South African Revenue Service. And I think the starting point will be to bolster the capacity of the South African Revenue Service. I think it's crystal clear these challenges existed pre-COVID and have only been exacerbated by the pandemic and the challenges that came with it. So I think government, in order to ensure that it recovers maximum tax from the industry, needs to ensure that there's proper policing at our border posts, where we're seeing a rampant sort of increase in smuggled goods from our neighboring countries, especially through the Beitbridge border post. It needs to ensure that locally the players in the industry are compliant in as far as what comes through in terms of the fiscus. And then finally, to ensure that there's proper engagement, again, meaningful engagement with industry role players to ensure that, there's a smoother transition from post the ban on the sale of cigarettes, and industries is engaged in all policies which affect the industry role players along the value chain.
Just in terms of impact as well, Snintantla, take us through, how tobacco farmers were also impacted by this prohibition. I mean, the CSA finding as well that the ban had infringed on the right to freedom of trade. Farmers couldn't make use of their farms, nor trade freely. The impact of that?
Yeah, definitely. And I think it goes all the way down the value chain. We heard of instances where farmers had to start farming other commodities in order to earn a living. We've seen in other components of the value chain where retailers, for instance, who had been in existence for centuries, had to close down. People lost jobs. And I think it's something that was felt throughout the entire industry value chain. So, yeah, it's been an unfortunate process. And I mean, even 2 years down the line of this ruling, we don't know there could still be an appeal. And I think government is wasting its resources by continuing to flog what we feel is a dead horse. We should be working on charting a way forward for the industry on how we can grow it and ensure that those who contribute to the industry in a legitimate manner or looked after as we feel that the state should be doing.
Yeah. So then what does this mean for government, for, the COCTA Minister, Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma? I know that she tried to appeal, but also the regulatory ban on the sale of tobacco during the national state of disaster officially now declared both unconstitutional and invalid. What does this mean for government?
Well, in the absence of an appeal, it would mean that they would not be able to implement such a draconian ban again. But again, we know that, common sense has not prevailed when dealing with this particular issue. And our fear is that, of course, if they do appeal it, I'm not saying that they'll be successful because I think the merits of their case are pretty weak. But it does buy them time. I do not see us having a situation similar to what we encountered in March. So I do not see a need ever rising again where they would want to implement such a ban. But it does, of course, raise concerns in industry that government still seems to feel quite strong about this particular issue. And we cannot obviously disclose or understand, rather, what the reasons for that would be. And I think government is best placed to advance those reasons. But we do not agree with that. And we hope that they finally, following this SCA ruling, understand that the ban, rather, was unscientific and further has no basis in law. We really hope that government is finally, clicked and will rather work with industry instead of taking them on in relation to this particular issue.
All right. Well, Chairperson of the Fair Trade Independent Tobacco Association, Snenhlanhla Mnguni, thank you so much for your time this morning.